he just lived every second of his life. He squeezed something out of every minute.
I had to take a power nap just to get ready for this interview.
Gracious.
No, what I was saying was like, it's amazing because I had to take a power nap just to get ready for this interview. The fact that he's doing major radio in the morning, major television show in the afternoon, going right back to the morning. So yeah, that's another thing that impressed me was his work ethic. And we talked about how the Donna Reed show led to Hogan's Heroes. Tell me how Bing Crosby and Desilu Productions got involved with that. Because Bing Crosby Productions obviously produced it, but then I know Desilu Productions was also involved with Hogan's Heroes.
Yeah, well, Al Ruddy and Al Ruddy and co-creator Linda.
Bernie Fine.
Bernard Fine. Woo! Al Ruddy.
Hey, and I got a dog over here.
Yeah, I know, you're jumping. So Albert S. Ruddy and Bernard Fine, co-creators, went and pitched the idea. And they, and that's
the interview ever.
Yes. And so they pitched the idea, and the idea, actually, they liked it. They liked the idea. And at that point of telling, Al and Bernard Fine, we want to, buy the script. We want to buy your idea. We want to buy the pilot. Do you want a piece of it? And they both said, yeah, go ahead. We're going to take the payout. And that's where Bing Crosby Productions buys Hogan's Heroes. In retrospect, Al Ruddy says, I wish I hadn't. I was just a kid at the time. We were just kids. And we just thought, wow, they're going to buy our script. That's awesome. Kind of not realizing that it would become the hit that it became, not realizing that several times there have been attempts to make a movie, which Al Ruddy then decided he was going to try and win back the rights to Hogan's Heroes, which became a really big back and forth litigation between Al Ruddy and then the owners, and then the Writers Guild of America West. So it was in and out of courts for back and forth. And Al had several scripts, one movie script that he was ready to go with, and then that didn't happen. And but he eventually did win back the rights, he and Bernard Fine's widow. And before the pandemic, he had announced back in September of 2019 that he was going to start. It almost seems like, you feel kind of bad. It almost seems like every single time he tries to make a remake or, something with Hogan's Heroes, there's something that comes up that prevents him from doing it. But he had announced at the end in September of 2019 that there was going to be a television reboot, not a real reboot, but a television reboot in the sense that was the descendants of all of the main characters from Hogan's Heroes. And they were going to go and be kind of like Raiders of the Lost Ark, treasure hunters type things, but it was all going to be the descendants of the main characters. And people had a whole bunch of mixed feelings about should it be created, should it not be created, leave the original alone, kind of back and forth. And then everything, of course, went on hold because we go into COVID in early 2020. And so that kind of then gets shelved. And, who knows if it'll ever get picked back up and running, once we come out of this, hopefully, sooner than later. But
they could film it down here.
Yeah.
We're okay.
Yeah.
We're okay.
We were. We're getting better.
Linda, I really quick, I just want to say, Linda, I interviewed Adrienne Barbeau right before the pandemic hit. She was filming in Australia, and she said she couldn't wait to get back to Australia. And she was telling me how, I think at the time I interviewed her in June, they only had 1 or 2 cases at the time. And she was saying how it's different there, how we listen to the scientists, and it's so
Don't get me started.
No,
mind you, we recently locked down. Our state locked down about 3 weeks ago. Because the second they had a case come in, the person came into the state and tested. She had tested negative on the way out. She tested positive on the way in, but they took the test. She didn't quarantine. She was wandering around for 4 or 5 days. And she must have come home and gone everywhere on earth because the number of places that had to lock down that she'd been. And then it was, this is the first time our state really had to lock down, and that was because they thought she was bringing in the UK version.
Yeah.
But after 10 days, it was all over. We're back to normal now again. So,
Right.
you know, ta-da!
I'm glad we're all going to Australia.
Yeah, everybody come on down. We got the kangaroos, we got the koalas, come on down, you know.
My mom got her vaccine Thursday, and it's like the apocalypse. It was on one of our local college campuses, and we waited, and I went with her. I didn't get mine. I just went with her to be with her, and we waited in line in the cold for almost an hour. When we got to the building, I couldn't accompany her into the building. I had to like separate from her and then go back to the car and wait for her, and which was a little bit nervous for me because my mom's eyes aren't that great, but she did great. She made friends along the way, and then she popped out the other side like a half hour later, and she got her shot and all. But we had my nephews both do summer theater at this particular college in the performing arts building, and this past summer, of course, my youngest nephew who's in it now didn't do it. And you know, just walking by the building and seeing it like all, you know, kind of closed up and locked, and then this line that just snakes around the whole, you know, campus to get a shot. It is survival of the fittest. It is scary. It is really scary, and I'm glad that we seem to be moving in a better direction now.
You know what? I know how you and Linda both feel, and the three of us are on the same page. Without getting into that, I'm definitely going to say the three of us are on the same page.
Thank
so
you.
getting back to Bob Crane.
Yes.
Because in the book, I love this because you debunk so many myths. And one of the myths that you debunked was the rivalry between Bob Crane and Richard Dawson. So Bob was actually offered Family Feud. He wanted nothing to do with the show because he didn't want to do a game show. And even though he hated the guy, I'm using quote unquote hated the guy so much, he referred Dawson to the producers. So I love the fact that you debunked that one as well, that there really wasn't, I mean, there might have been some, you know, competitiveness, but there really wasn't a rivalry where they hated each other.
I think it was a professional rivalry. I think that there were things that we do not know. You know, we all go to work. We work with different people, work with different personalities. We all try to get along because we have a job to do and we have to get it done, and then we need to go home. And there are some people that we get along really, really well with, and then there are some people that we just don't click with. It doesn't mean we hate those people. It means that there are some people that are just not, you know, we just gravitate towards certain people and not so much to others. Richard Dawson was an actor. He felt he was, I think, a better actor than Bob, because Bob was coming in off of radio and didn't have, all he had at that point was the Donna Reed show and, you know, some guest starring work. Whereas Richard Dawson was more, you know, considered himself more of an actor's actor at that point.
I remember he's also a little bit of was also a little bit of an odd duck.
Yes. And people had said that.
Richard, I mean, that's not to say he was, you know, he was just,
he was different.
How he became later in his life, he was a little different. He was more reclusive. You know, he was just, they were chalk and cheese personalities. And that can create tensions just because of how they face the day. But if you listen to Richard Dawson, and I'm sorry, this may be what you were going to say anyway.
No, you go for it.
If, you know, when he was doing some interviews for the DVDs, he said they couldn't have given me Hogan. He said Bob was made for that role. It wouldn't have worked for me. It couldn't have. And so he understood that. You know, he understood, and I believe that wasn't it Jane Golden who said Bob's cousin, one of Bob's cousin, if you need anything, you find Richard Dawson.
Oh yes, yes.
You need anything, you find with Jane, wasn't it? Yeah. You need
Jane.
anything, you need anything, you find Richard Dawson, he'll help you. So, you know, he trusted him. He knew him well enough to say, you know, they're okay. They weren't best friends. I mean, I've worked with 10 people. I'm not best friends with them all. I hired one of them, and half the time I go, my God, what have I done? But you know, she has a great value to the business, and we have had our moments, and we get over them, and we get along because we work together. Would we hang out together outside of work? No, but you know, we work very well together professionally. We make, you know, we make our parts, into the hole. And that's what they did. They, even in Bob's letter, you can go into that, Carol, at the end.
Yes.
Bob writes to everybody and said, certain things to Richard that make us understand, they weren't always besties, but they understood each other's value.
And in that letter, it was never Bob hating anybody. I don't think Bob really hates the word, and I don't think he hated anybody. And Scott, I remember Scott saying at some point, Bob was Scott Crane, Bob's son. Bob he liked everybody, and he was always doing favors for people. He always did favors for people, even people who didn't, for whatever reason, like him. And he was always looking out for people. And in the letter that he wrote to Richard Dawson, because he wrote, like Linda said, to everybody in the cast and some crew members as well, even Ivan Dixon, who had left the year before, not, out of anger or anything. He just wanted to direct, and the contract was up after 5 years. But in the letter to Richard Dawson, Bob says, I value our basic professional differences in so many words. But he says, I hope we can work again one day. I hope the day comes where we can work together again. And so, he always left that door open. He did not slam doors. And he was really badly personally wounded when he learned that maybe somebody didn't like him for whatever reason.
Oh, yeah.
And that becomes very evident in the Bob Crane show in 1974-75. It was filmed in 74, but then it aired in 75. And I should say it started filming in 74. But when he heard that the one fellow didn't really particularly like him, Skippy, and I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but
James.
It was and I'll tell you in a second. Hang on.
Not James Sartorius.
No, it was
Kevin Sussman.
Nope. I'm gonna tell you real quick.
You're no fun at all.
No, I know. It's
I love Google.
I'm gonna look it up.
No, it's not. I'm not in Google. I am in my electronic edition of the book.
That's cheating. I'm in the actual version. I'm in the hard copy.
Hang on. It's on my here. Norman Powell was the director.
You're talking about
come on. Where are you? Hang on, bear with me. But he went by Skippy. He went by this and he was so upset.
Well, they wanted to hire. Remember, again, this was another show where they didn't
Larry Hagman.
Bob.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, they wanted to hire Larry Hagman, and it was done by Mary Tyler
Larry
Moore
Hagman.
Productions.
It was Norman Powell.
No, Norman Powell
didn't
care,
care
but it was the producer, I think.
Norman Powell didn't care for him at all.
Why was that? He didn't like his acting style?
Yeah, he didn't think he was right.
The acting.
He wanted Larry Hagman. He said, I don't think he's right. Get away from my jelly beans, dog.
So what happened with Larry Hagman? I know they wanted him originally, and then he turned it down.
No.
They just said, we want Bob, or you're not doing this show.
Okay.
Right. And NBC pushed for Bob. NBC pushed for Bob.
You want Bob, or you don't get the show.
Yes.
Now I know it was produced by Mary Tyler Moore Productions. Did she have any say in this at all?
No,
I didn't think so.
No, it's really Norm that didn't want him.
Yeah.
Norm was
Jackie Cooper.
Oh, Jackie Cooper.
Really?
Yeah, but Jackie Cooper never liked him.
Little Rascals.
And he was when they were watching the show, and it was this was taped before a live studio audience, and Bob thought he felt very
that was another mistake
in front of a studio audience, and Norman Powell and Jackie Cooper were watching from the back, and Jackie Cooper was like, I'm just gonna climb. The
greatest single episodic comedian in our business is Alan Alda. That's what he would say to Bob.
Yes.
Oh my God.
You know, he
Yeah.
and Jackie Cooper, of course, I think did a lot with Alan Alda at some stage. But
Yeah.
you
Bob
know,
took it very
he
hard.
was nasty. He was downright nasty to him.
And
He
Bob
didn't
took
care
it.
for Bob at
He
all.
took those kinds of things really hard. Now, was the
Well,
Bob
you know, it
Crane
was nasty.
show?
You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
he was nasty.
Well, there's two things that I was reading about that show in your book that were hurdles that he had to overcome. One was the FCC's new primetime access rule. What was that?
Local programming.
Yes.
Local programming. Stations had to show, and you can get into better specifics perhaps than I can on this, Carol, but stations, you know, say CBS affiliates across, or NBC, I think in this case, NBC affiliates across the country had all these programs. However, they must have at least 90 minutes of local programming a night or a week or whatever. I can't remember the specifics. I'm sorry. And that meant that a lot of these shows just didn't get airtime.
That's right.
Because they had to show their local stuff. They couldn't show stuff from the nationals. They had to show their own stuff. Carol, you'd be better at this than I will.
Yeah, like when you saw prime time, like here in Philly, in the Philadelphia area, at 7:30, it would be prime time, and it was with a local host that, you know, around here it was, you know, Jim O'Brien, who did our weather, and he hosted this show called Prime Time, and it cut into what would have been, and that's why they called it Prime Time. That's when a regular, you know, Hollywood produced, you know, show would have aired, but it's the local programming. And as a result,
and gee, some of it was bad, and it didn't matter because that wasn't the point of having it. But it was terrible.
Yeah,
what it did to many national shows.
And that then pushes a lot of these shows into, you know, a later start. And so what was originally called second start then got pushed back into later in the season. Then it became a mid-season replacement. So it was pushed back twice.
Well, it was going to be January, I think, and then it got pushed back again.
March. And at that point, Bob was like, why even bother? It's like, it's
who premieres a show in March?
But that opens the door for Bob to become picky in
it was mistakes. He just made mistake after mistake after mistake. And that delay cost that show an awful lot. That breaks my heart. I read that chapter in the book and I cry.
Because you
can literally cry because I look at the mistakes that he made, always trying to do the right thing again, learning comfort levels, you know, but he was being stubborn. And at that point, he did have yes men around him saying, we'll do that because that's what he wants.
Right.
But Bob wasn't doing it because he wasn't trying to get it because he was his way, because he was Bob. He was trying to get it that way because that's how he felt comfortable.
Yes.
And unfortunately, he was wrong.
He also fought to have a live crowd and three cameras used instead of only one. But that didn't work out, did it? Or
no. And the show wasn't designed for that. He wanted what he had on Hogan's Heroes, but it wasn't the kind of show that was designed to be like Hogan's Heroes. It was a completely different show, different format, had a different feeling to it, in multi-camera and live audiences. And live audiences for a show like that, no, wasn't going to work. But Bob was so used to by then that idea of immediate feedback from theater that he felt his performances were better, but instead they became worse, because what you have to do with live theater is overact to a degree to reach people that are, you know, standing or sitting 40 feet away, you know, in the back of a large theater or whatnot. And when you're on film, even if the live audience is there, you have to react as if they're not there. You have to act as if you're talking to someone right next to you all the time. And he mixed those two things together and it just didn't work. And they said, yes, yes, Bob, yes, Bob, yes, Bob.
Yeah, they didn't stand up.
And they shouldn't have. They should have stuck to their guns, but they didn't want to mess with him. But he was desperately unhappy and he knew that it was wrong, but it was too late by then.
That's right.
Oh, it breaks my heart. Breaks my heart. It could have been so much more than it was.
I saw a couple episodes when I was doing my research, and one of the episodes I saw featured a very young John Ritter. he was on there. So the show, I think if they stuck with it and did exactly what you said, it could have been a good show. But unfortunately, it didn't work out that way.
The premise was great. And I mean, you can't do better than having an MTM backup.
Exactly.
You know, I mean, gee whiz. Grant Tinker, he was huge later on. Huge. He knew exactly what he was doing. Grant Tinker, Mary Tyler Moore Productions. This show should have been
a shoo-in.
Huge. Should have been huge. Should have been an absolute shoo-in. And he tweaked and he played and he asked and he cajoled and they said yes, 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 because that's what he wanted. And it was the wrong thing. He did it all for the right reasons, but it was the wrong thing. And the show just fell apart.
Well, I have to say, I respect Bob for he always knew what he wanted. And one example is that he turned down so many offers that most people would say, I'll take this in a minute. One was Family Feud, which we mentioned. Another one was The Tonight Show before Johnny Carson. He turned that down as well because he didn't want to do a talk show. So I love the fact, I mean, so many people can easily fall into, hey, it's a paycheck. I'm going to do it. And that will lead me to something else when I want to do something later. He said, no, I'm going to stick to my guns. And so I do have a lot of respect. Another one, I think he turned down a movie with Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward, if I'm correct. That's what I was reading in your book. There was
trying to remember.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of the movie, but
yeah, you're gonna look, aren't you? I'm gonna look too.
I like how we have on the spot.
Again, it was a mistake.
You know, this is but yes, he did turn down a role. He did a role in a film with Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward, which he declined. The timing was perfect, and it is an important picture, Bob said in March 1969, but I'm wrong for the part. The guy they want should be 6'3", 60, smoke cigars, and be Mr. Big, someone like Forrest Tucker. There was a role I could play in a picture, a schnook, but I decided against it.
And that was him misunderstanding his own acting ability and putting himself into that I'm Hogan stereotype that he so desperately needed to get out of. That if he had actually stretched those acting chops, let the casting director decide what they want.
Right.
And you don't turn down a job with Paul Newman.
No. I don't care what it is.
And go, oh well, I play the schnook. Really? You always want to play the schnook? There's only so many of those around, and those jobs are getting picked up by Gig Young, Tony Randall, Jack Lemmon. Bob Crane isn't going to be the fourth one of those. Take what you can get. They're giving you a great opportunity to do a role with a really important couple. This film could at the very least stand out as a small but important piece for you.
And instead,
again, Bob trying to take control of his own career, which was fine, but being so single-minded in some of that he missed opportunities that he could have had. And again, that's because he was just a human guy who thought that this was what he needed to do to put things where he wanted them to be, and didn't understand at that point that he actually needed someone else to step in and go, "Oi, I want you to do this, just do it." And he didn't say yes, and he should have said yes.
There's another story. We talked about Bob going through some hard times. Tell me the connection between Bob and the movie The Godfather.
That's an Albert S. Ruddy connection.
Yeah, that was one of the best interviews we did, I think, and it was the most unprepared one we
very natural.
Carol. But Al was filming The Godfather. He was producing The Godfather, because he had said even when he sold Hogan's that he wanted to make movies, and this was the movie, wasn't it? The big movie.
Was the movie.
And it's just an odd little
story.
It's just an odd little anecdote that Al Ruddy told us, which is that they were filming in New York, and at some point he looked up and he saw Bob. And Bob came over to him and said words to the effect of, "After all I did, couldn't you have given me something in this?" And Al simply said something like, I'm sorry, Bob."
He said, "Hang back and I'll talk to you."
Yeah, come
I'll talk
back
to you
later
after
on and
the-
I'll talk to
after
you.
the
And he
scene.
turned around and Bob was gone
Bob
and
was
he never
gone.
saw him again.
Mhm.
And Bob was at that stage where he really needed work. And he saw that, and he did see that, and I think to some degree, and this is pure speculation, of course, but that Bob may or may not have really understood that once Al Ruddy created and sold Hogan's Heroes, that was the end of it.
Mhm.
He sold it, he got money, he went off and did the things he wanted to do. And that, and Bob wasn't making a lot of money off of Hogan's Heroes either, because he had bought into the show as a shareholder or as a profit shareholder, but up until he died, I don't think they managed to somehow make it so that show was never earning a profit. So he was really struggling. And when you could see something as big as what you knew The Godfather would be,
Mhm.
because even when it was being made, and I mean, I was quite young at the time, but I would think, based on who was in it, based on who was involved with it, that it would have been fairly obvious that it was going to be a big, big deal.
Mhm.
That Bob felt like, not that Al owed him anything, but then that reciprocation that Bob always felt when people did things for him. He always felt he owed people who helped him, that he was disappointed that Al didn't feel that back. But I don't think that was really a fair assumption to make. But I think, and again, purely speculation, that Bob was feeling that way out of a desperation of needing, I need to work. And look at what he had just said, I turned down Paul Newman because I couldn't do this serious thing. I have to pay the schmuck. And he wanted to play someone in The Godfather. I mean, good grief. There's a totally different kind of character than what you would have expected. But so quite a sad moment, and it bothered Al Ruddy quite a bit as well. It bothered Al
enough for him to tell us about
to
it.
mention it. Yeah, 40 years later,
Sure.
30 years later, it was very very troubling to him. He felt sad about it, as do I, kind of just thinking about what was Bob thinking. And maybe Bob thought twice, because clearly when Al said, come back later and we'll talk, he never went back.
Maybe he was embarrassed. We don't know
Yeah.
what was going through his head, but if that were me, I'd be pretty embarrassed. I'd be like, okay, let me get out of here.
Yeah, I had a moment of weakness. Now I'm just going to disappear.
Let's talk about something more fun than that.
Yes, please.
Yes.
No, I actually listened to it again today. It's called Bob Crane and his orchestra play the funny side of TV. He does TV themes with jokes in between the songs. I loved it. I listened to it 3 times today. It's hilarious.
Stu Phillips is brilliant, and he was a terrific producer.
Oh,
He
yes.
did a lot of incidental music. I mean, he did incidental music for the Monkees, Stu Phillips. He does a lot of works with a lot of orchestras and television themes, and he is just, Stu Phillips is so much fun. And guess what Bob got to do, on that album? He got to play. He said, and Stu Phillips said to us, Bob just looked like a kid in a candy store. He was just like, get to and the guys loved him, didn't they? They had a good time.
On the cover of the album, Stu Phillips says, look at that smile on the cover of the album. Again, it's that little boy smile, that he is having the best day of his life when that's all going on. When they decided to do that album, of course, those are all professional musicians in the orchestra. And there was a little bit of reservation at first as to, oh, okay, so Bob's a drummer, Bob Crane's a drummer. Okay, how's this going to work? And so there wasn't, like Stu said, there wasn't pushback, but there was maybe some reservation that he wasn't going to be able to keep up. But after they went through it all and they rehearsed, and then they were recording the album, Stu said that he was able to keep up, absolutely. And then he earned the respect of the musicians, these professional studio musicians that were on this album with Bob, that they were very much impressed with. That he was, how did he say it? He was not professional up to professional standards as a drummer. But for an amateur drummer, he was very, very good. And that was, and he was
a professional amateur.
Yes.
He was a professional amateur, as in he wasn't the kid next door learning on, in high school. He was he was accomplished.
But he wasn't a professional getting paid for it as these studios.
But geez, he had a good time.
Well,
and he made sure that they all had a good time. Remember,
yes, they had
it was really important to Bob that everybody enjoyed it.
Yes, he was cracking up all the, the musicians were just cracking up, having a good time throughout the whole album. And, there are the two albums from Hogan's Heroes. There's Bob Crane, his drums and orchestra, play the funny side of TV. And then there is Hogan's Heroes, sing the best of World War II. And there is a reason for the two albums, is that Bob wanted all of the cast from Hogan's Heroes to be on the cover of his album. And they said no, because they wanted to get paid for it. They weren't going to just do it as a favor. They wanted to actually get paid for it. And so in answer, it's a really weird thing. Like I even to this day, when I think about that, it's like, so they didn't want to do it because they wanted to get paid, but then they go over and then they do Richard Dawson, Robert Clary, Larry Hovis, and Ivan Dixon cut their own album, minus Bob, of singing the Hogan's Heroes theme, which that's where you find out what the lyrics are. And then you've got all of the other songs that they did, Don't Sit Under the Apple Tree, all of the World War II time era songs. But they didn't want to do the cover shoot. And the ones who do the cover shoot do it as a favor to Bob. And it's Werner Klemperer, John Banner, his second wife, Sigrid Valdis, Patricia Olsen, and then way in the back, all the way in the back as a German guard, is his first son, Robert. And that's why you just see that collection of people from the show, and then his son in the back, which we didn't even know that was his son until kind of quite recently.
No.
That came up somewhere along the way. But
well, I heard an interview with Robert where he played on the show as a guard as well.
I haven't spotted him.
Yeah.
I heard him mention that.
I haven't spotted him.
Okay.
Because he would have been what?
In his teens.
No,
in his teens,
16?
That's what he's. I don't
I mean,
know.
it's possible, but I haven't spotted him. I just haven't. I haven't spotted him.
Well, you mentioned earlier about that they're worrying that he's not going to be able to keep up with the professional musicians. I have to give you an honest reaction from my fiance Sarah today. She was in the car one of the times I was listening. She goes, "Wait, that's Bob Crane? Well, he's good." That's exactly what she said, because she doesn't know anything about him at all. She likes Hogan's Heroes, but she doesn't know the radio and everything else. And she goes, "Oh, he plays drums. Wow, I didn't realize how good he was." So that's an honest reaction from somebody just listening.
Oh, he's very good. Yeah.
He's really Well, I told you I watched all the clips. Smothers Brothers, Dick, Red Skelton, and I said what you talked about, even with the record, you could just tell he's having the time of his life, and it made it so much fun to watch, seeing how much fun he was having.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And anytime you get him near a drum set, that's the face you get. It's just
a little fun fact.
Really,
he also plays drums on the theme song for Hogan's Heroes.
Yes,
he does.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about Hogan's Heroes review.
Okay.
So tell me about that. This was after Hogan's Heroes. It was taking place after Hogan's Heroes. And tell me what it was about and what happened with it.
So Hogan's Heroes review was was going to be kind of an ending to Hogan's Heroes. And Werner Klemperer was going to be on board with it. Robert Clary was on board with it. He had asked Richard Dawson, who was up in the air with it. And then his good friend, Johnny Thompson, who was a magician, passed away several years ago, but he was a consultant for Penn and Teller, Chris Angel, in his later years. And so it was going to be a Las Vegas live review. It was going to be performed at one of the casinos, and the starting they had film that they shot at the set of Stalag 13 of leaving Stalag 13 and then on a boat heading to America, and then landing in America, and then taking on this new troupe of performers. And Werner Klemper, Klink, was going to be the business agent or the business manager of the thing. Bob was going to be the drummer. Robert Clary was going to sing, and Johnny Thompson was going to do magic tricks. And he had it all written out. Bob had it all. Bob was a writer, which a lot of people don't know, but he was a writer, and he had it all scripted. He had it all written out, what this was going to be, how this was going to be performed. And the manager at the casino where they were going to perform it, Bob and the manager didn't agree to the business deal that was being made. Bob believed that it was shady. It was not on the up and up, that there was some, not, I'm looking for the right words, but it was not going to be on the level. And because of that, Bob decided to pull the show from the casino. And when that happened, it never went anywhere beyond that. Would I have loved to have seen what that script looked like and what that intended to be and what all of that could have been? Absolutely. I never found any of that when I went through Bob's belongings at the storage facility where his son Scott has all of his things, and I went through tons and tons and tons and tons of things, and that was not in any of it. So I don't know if it exists somewhere that I just didn't see it, that Scotty doesn't know where it is. If it's filmed somewhere that's on a reel of film that, again, I mean, Bob has, there are reels and reels and reels of air checks and these types of production things.
Sorry.
That Scott has, but is it there? That I don't know, but I would have loved to have seen it because it does, it's very interesting. And as someone who wishes the show had a proper ending, it actually gives a proper ending. And, we know a little bit about what at least Bob thought would have happened to some of the characters after the war ended.
Well, you have to say it sounds much better than the premise for Aftermath. That show, I mean, we go back and forth between Hogan's Heroes and MASH. I think Hogan's Heroes review and Aftermath, I would definitely go with Hogan's Heroes review. Sounds like a much better premise. It sounds much funnier. I want to talk about one of the first reality shows out there. It's called The Hawaii Experience. Tell me about that.
Well, The Hawaii Experience was filmed in early 1978 in February. So it was after the Love Boat. It's before, obviously.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. So Hawaii Experience. By the way, if you hear a cat crying and scratching under the door, I've got a dog and a cat on the other side of this door trying to get to me. And they've been very patient on the other side of the door, but
I made it.
So the Hawaii Experience was kind of a departure from what Bob had wanted to do, which was act. And it was, again, Bob had turned down game shows. He didn't want to do television talk shows. And so this was kind of going against the grain as to what he actually wanted to do, which was act, but he also needed money. And so to make money, he saw this as an opportunity. Bob basically had the first reality show, I guess you could call her, one of the first reality shows. And the idea of the Hawaii Experience was to go behind the scenes out on the Hawaiian Island, the big Hawaiian Islands, and go through the resorts and go through the restaurant and go through the hotels and go through the where the one where he's riding the dolphin, the
whale,
the lake
whale.
It wasn't a whale, it was a dolphin. Was it a whale?
So you can't ride a dolphin, they're too small.
But he's so he is doing the the behind the scenes that we're now so used to. We have all of these shows on all of these channels that show you, how the chef at the 5-star restaurant cooks salmon, we know how, this resort does this. And, we have all of these television shows, whether they're documentaries or reality shows or whatever. He was going to go and be kind of spearhead this new venture into documentary TV or reality TV to show what the Hawaiian resorts were like behind the scenes. How did they prepare, for the food, for the guests, for, all of these things. And it obviously never got produced because Bob died before it got into the post-production, far into the post-production. There were rumors about it being cursed because there was the Hawaiian god legend and all that. Was the show cursed? And take that with a grain of salt. But it was
a throwback to the Brady Bunch.
Brady Bunch, right? The Hawaiian idol, right? The gods.
Another interview I did was Victoria Price. Another interview I did was Victoria Price, and we talked about that episode with Vincent Price.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking when you were telling me that. It's funny.
Yeah. So it was something that, I think he enjoyed as far as being a host. It was not something that I think he was fully embracing, because at the end of the day, what he wanted to do was act. But was it going to help him move forward away from Hogan, make some money, pay the bills, that kind of thing, keep him in mainstream media? Yes, absolutely. And so, he was, that was filling that particular void for him as he was seeking to advance his career into, away from Hogan. That being said, and this is my personal opinion, there's absolutely nothing anywhere that I can say this is, based on any kind of research other than what we've already, known and written about. But had Bob lived into the 80s, and you see these great sitcoms coming up, you have Cheers, you have, Night Court, you have, all of these ensemble cast type shows that were right up his alley.
Yeah.
I think had he lived into the 80s, I think he would have found new life as an actor or even a director in one of these ensemble shows, Murphy Brown, Frasier, these shows that are these big, broad strokes kind of television comedy. That was what he was craving, and either as a director or as an actor, I think he would have done very well in the 1980s as those types of shows came into being. And they're very, when you look back at those 80s shows, Family Ties even, and, all of those shows, they're all that big ensemble cast, and they pull from all different types of personalities. And I really, it breaks my heart when I see the 80s come into being and how diverse the television shows are and how diverse the sitcoms are. And he would have really found, I believe, in my opinion, a place in 1980s situation comedy.
Definitely see that. I can definitely see that. Well, we talked about all the myths you've been debunking in the book, the two of you. Another myth you debunked involved another reality show. It was called Celebrity Cooks. Let's talk about that.
Go for it. Linda.
Linda, it's all you.
Linda. We both feel very passionate about this in particular. Yeah. She and I could probably recite this to you in stereo. It's so tragic what has happened. So yeah. Linda, you can take it away.
Linda, it's all you.
Yeah. It's disgusting. It really is.
It is.
In 1978, in the January, I think it was filmed, wasn't it? In January 1978, Bob was invited to be a guest on Celebrity Cooks, which is a show for Canadian Broadcasting Company, so the CBC. And it was very, very popular. The host of the show was Bruno, I can't say his last name right, Girosi.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Sure. Yes, you did.
Big hair, big mustache, big Italiano, brilliant, big fun, like bigger fella, just one of those good, fun people to have as a host. Matter of fact, the same day that Bob was doing they had Julia Child. I wonder, I would love to see that episode, by the way. Cook with Cook. Yeah. And Bob was invited to come up and be a guest on the show. And he went up and and the premise of the show was that you would bring a recipe and you would cook it. We all remember the cooking shows from the 70s and 80s, the very early cooking shows where they would just have someone come on to this beautiful little kitchen set and here's your little table, and everybody would, and they would have a little talk while they were cooking about something. vague. They had a little interview segment, not a long one, 5 minutes, nothing terribly personal. What are you working on? Tell me about this and that. And then while they were cooking, and then they would sit down and eat it, and here's how it turned out. And Bob was invited to go do this show, and he went up, and it wasn't a big deal. It was a one-day, I think it was just a one-day shoot. And he went up and he went through the kitchens, and they go, okay. And he was making some kind of chicken recipe. And Bob was very interested in how it was all working and how things worked in the kitchen and how things got done and whatever. And then he went on air, and they filmed the show, and he was a funny guest. Again, 5-minute bio, not much to it. And then they just did the cooking, and he talked about the recipe and where it came from and this and that. And then they sat down to eat, and there's the tiniest little clip on YouTube, which was just right up Bob's alley. It just shows exactly the way he was, which was, he said he's sitting there having this meal, and he said, oh, that just reminds me of this joke. Two cannibals are sitting down for a meal, and he says, I don't like my mother-in-law. So the other cannibal says to him, that's okay, just eat your peas. and that was it. Like, it was funny, and it was breezy, and there was nothing special. And then Bob flew out and went home and did his thing. And this show had not run in the United States. And it was supposed to air in early July 1978 in New York. And a producer named, or a CBS executive named Jeff Erdell, decided not to run it. But what happened was that Jeff gave an interview to some publication, New York Times, some publication.
No, it was one of the like Hollywood magazines. It was,
Photo
Play or
something like that. But he gave some interview saying that
after Bob died. This was
after Bob died, saying that we had this, but we didn't run it because and he had the episode ready to run. So it's not like he didn't have the tape.
Hold it.
And he said we didn't run it because Bob was really dark. He was very upset. He was crying. He was bemoaning his divorce, upcoming divorce. He was making sexual jokes. He was saying all this inappropriate stuff. And so we didn't run it. And we found and spoke with 4 people who were directly involved in the filming and producing of that show. That episode ran several times in Canada. Unfortunately, there's nothing left of it now except that, 15 seconds on YouTube.
Which I saw on YouTube.
Yeah.
I saw that clip.
Yeah. And they said it was a load of codswallop.
They were angry.
They were very angry. They were very surprised, very, very upset. Said that Bob was one of the best guests that they ever had, that he was funny and he was cheerful and he expected nothing. Like, he was just, very unassuming, I think is the best word for it. Very, very much like we've learned that Bob is when he works. Yes. Bob goes to work and he works.
Yes.
Period. He happens to be in a job that, he's famous in this particular case, he could be himself. But he was just Bob. He was friendly and he was funny. He got on with everybody. There were no tears. There was nothing inappropriate. There was no sexual innuendo. There was no talk about death. Erdell said was harping on about death and divorce. And there was literally none of that. And it seemed like it was an Erdell play for 15 minutes of fame. And the floor manager, the producer, the people who looked after the guests, they were all there and said that there was absolutely zero, and I mean zero, truth to what Erdell said. And they were horrified and they were angry. And it was, again, one of those things that got perpetuated by that film.
Will not mention the name.
The name shall not be used, that film. And it was completely and utterly false. All of it was, and it was so important to them and to us because it became such a defining thing. Yes. Because that interview came out shortly after Bob died. So it became one of those defining moments that in the book, we've actually published all the interviews with the people that were involved in that show. Mm-hmm. And it's a fair chunk. And sometimes people might wonder why we've done that. But we've done that simply because of the impact of that falsity. That it was important that they see not just pieces of what the people who were there had to say, but everything that the people that were there had to say, and understand that, words have power. Yeah. And this guy's words were completely false. Whatever his reasoning was, is completely irrelevant to the fact that Bob was not there to defend himself, that the people in Canada didn't know anything about that interview, and because, it's just a local, something in the United States. And for this, one interview out of what would have been hundreds from people after he died, they wouldn't have known. And then they saw this monstrosity come out on film and said, that's not what happened. And nobody again, a lot of what we were told when we were talking to people about this book was, but nobody wanted to hear that.
That's right.
Nobody wanted to hear that. Nobody wanted to hear that. What they wanted to hear was
shock and awe.
Scandal, scandal, sensationalism, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, that they wanted the stuff that was going to sell. And what would sell was that Bob was this guy that you looked at and you said, he's a nice guy. Look at him. He's so likable. He's, even when he didn't have a show, his likability ratings were huge because of who he was. Mm-hmm. And so for them to get this sudden shock of look what he was, let's just extend that. He was not there to defend himself when he died, to tell people, look, I had this addiction, but this is, not who I am. And I was trying to do something about it, but nobody wanted to hear that. And this show just perpetuated, or this interview about this show, the way it got portrayed in that movie, just perpetuated that myth that just, if you want to pick like 3 things that really ping us off, that's one of them.
Because it's disgusting. It's this one man who had a gut feeling. And even when the reporter who was interviewing him said, okay, give me specifics. Can you give me something? He couldn't give specific. He says, well, it's just kind of a feeling I had, and
he not backed up by anything that was on film. And because they then chose not to air it, nobody could refute it.
That's right.
It's just a shame because I saw clips of that show with David Letterman and other stars in the U.S. But the funny thing, or the sad thing is that you only have that 15-second clip of Bob Crane. I wish they had the full episode and they could show the world. It's like, no, this is the show. There's no hidden agenda here. There's no drama. We just had a fun show. I wish that actually existed still.
Yeah, we do too. We've searched. Believe me, we searched so hard trying to find that, and it just simply, unless somebody recorded it off of their VCR.
The Betamax
point, on their Betamax.
Yep.
I
remember it well.
But like Anne said, I think it was Anne that said, that if he'd been like that, we wouldn't have aired it.
And
she said this was on in the middle. This was on at like 3:00 in the afternoon. If he had been like that, we wouldn't have aired it, or they would have told us that we can't. She said there is no way. She said even if you take away anything that we say. If you take away anything that Jeff says and just say, here's the show, here's the time frame, here's the time of day that it runs. She said, if he had done even half the things that Erdell claimed, they never would have aired that show. Never.
And the other piece too is that to them, yes, Bob Crane is a celebrity. He's coming up from Hollywood. He's going to do this show. He's going to do this taping. to them, yes, it's a celebrity, but it's also just a guy that's coming in. It's not anyone who's really affiliated in any way, shape, or form with the production of their show. If he comes up and is a total train wreck, they're just gonna say, okay, see ya, you're done. Thank you, but we're never having you back, and this is going in the trash. We're not going to do anything with this. They would have asked him to leave.
Yeah.
And, if some of it could have been salvaged, they would have maybe tried, but they certainly wouldn't have defended it and reacted so strongly. When I remember when I talked to Ann Kerr, who was the talent agent for Celebrity Cooks for the first time. And, I would do kind of like a pre-call before we would all get on the interview. And she was so deeply angry, and I think she said the word no something to about 30 times. No, 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 no. This was just
and
like,
they all did it again in the interviews, didn't they? Just no. We
no.
said we're going to take this, and we took the article and we broke it down piece by piece for them. He claims this. No. He claims this. Absolutely not. He claims this. Where on earth did he get, like, every single point? Because so we said, is there any, we took every single point. There wasn't a shred of truth to any of it. Not a single point he made was true.
And
not a single point. And the worst part is that not the worst part, but as a journalist myself, what kills me is that the journalist and the publication that chose to publish that didn't say, let me see the tape.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see the tape. Mm-hmm. This is sensational stuff if it's true.
Right.
Let me see the tape. I want to see. No, well, can you give me specifics? Well, no. Well, then let me see and I'll pick up the specifics, because that's what a real journalist should do.
And that never happened.
And it never. Oh, don't.
Let
us go, man. Don't let us go.
No. I am in complete agreement with you. And unfortunately, people love to believe sensationalism, like you said, with the movie that shall not be named. People are going to believe that. But thank God, I've said this several times throughout the interview, I love the fact that you two and Dee came out with this book to dig deep into his life, to show all the great things he did. And there was so much more to what we're going to get to next, fact versus fiction, and what happened on June 29th. But before we do that, I have a question for you regarding a very important person in his life. His name is Ed Beck. Tell me what his role was.
Ed Beck was, from the outside, the manager of the Windmill Dinner Theater chain. A manager. He was the guy who signed the paychecks. He opened up the theater. Ed Beck did not let his real credentials be known unless somebody asked for them. Reverend Beck is, and he's still alive, last I checked. Mm-hmm. He is a minister with the United Church of Christ. And back in the 60s and 70s, the United Church of Christ wanted to do an outreach program. And one of those outreach programs was to help actors, traveling actors across the country, to the different dinner theaters. And Windmill Dinner Theater was a chain, not just in Arizona, but also in Denver and in Texas and in Seattle, Washington. And so these actors would travel and had, as traveling human beings, there may come a time when somebody needs some sort of counsel, that they feel that they need some help in a certain area. People did not know Ed Beck was a minister. They just knew him as the guy who signed the checks and opened the theater and did those sorts of things. And when Bob was in Scottsdale, he asked somebody if they knew of somebody that he could talk to. He kind of let his guard down and he said, I'm looking to talk to somebody. I'm, kind of in over my head here with this, and I'd like to talk. And the person that he asked said, well, the guy you want to talk to is Ed Beck. And Bob's reaction was a bit startled. And he said, why? That's not, it's just the guy that's opening the theater for me every night. He's a minister, and he's an addiction counselor. And Reverend Beck was that. He was an addiction counselor for alcohol and drugs, not sexual addiction, but he knew certain aspects of addiction would translate across, regardless of the addiction. And so Bob reached out to Reverend Beck, and they had what I guess you could call preliminary conversations about what Bob was going through, the addiction that he was recognizing, the help that he was going to seek professionally. And it wasn't a deep dive into Bob's psyche, but it was enough for Bob to get that first bit of understanding of what work needed to be done in order to come to terms with his addiction, and then take the steps to battle it and control it. And you don't ever really overcome it, but you can control it. And so Reverend Beck had very profound discussions with Bob in the weeks leading up to Bob's murder. And those discussions, Linda, Dee, and I are not psychologists. We're not addiction specialists. We don't pretend to be, but we did try to understand from various points of view, from a psychological standpoint, what all of this meant, what Reverend Beck told us. Reverend Beck does have really esteemed credentials. I don't know if you have watched Homicide Hunter, but he had helped Lieutenant Joe Kenda on a case in Denver at one point. And there's an episode, I remember why, I think Linda, you too, you watched the episode, like,
oh, and hey, I know that guy.
I know
that guy.
But so he
that was a sad story.
Yeah. And so he really was the first person that Bob reached out to. Bob confessed to Reverend Beck that he recognized that he had an addiction, that he wanted to get out of it, that he knew there would be a lot of work to do so. His children were at the forefront of his reasoning to want to change, because his children were starting to ask questions, and he could not answer them truthfully and still call himself a good father, because it was out there in Hollywood. People in Hollywood knew, he had gotten fired from Disney, for visiting strip clubs and, topless bars and playing drums at topless bars. They knew that, Hollywood is big to all of us because it's this grand place, but it's still a tiny town. It's still a small town, and everybody knows everybody. And they all knew that Bob was into this kind of lifestyle, which, as you had mentioned earlier, Rich, it was all consensual. It was all adult. It was all, women who knew they were being videoed, and they were, willing participants in what Bob was doing. It was never about, rape or conquest or drugging or anything like that. It was purely for the enjoyment of the moment for Bob, for both parties.
And even enjoyment, you use loosely.
Yeah. Exactly. Because when you're in the addiction, it's just like having a glass of wine. If you're having a glass of wine because you're enjoying your dinner and having a glass of wine, and you're, having that, enjoying the aroma and the sensation of the wine, that is not an addict who's chugging the bottle and says, oh yeah, I'm enjoying getting drunk. It's what I do. It's not really enjoyment. If you are, tethered to that activity. And can't break free of it. And so Bob had been shaken by that. He would go to these different cities and go to, he'd land in, whatever city he was going to be performing in dinner theater. And he would say, this time I'm not going to fool around. Mm-hmm. And that lasted all about 5 seconds, because there's a beautiful woman that just walked by, and hey, I'm Bob Crane, Colonel Hogan.
Or a not beautiful woman.
Yes.
Or again, all about, I think, wasn't it Tootie Benedetto, even back in Connecticut, was saying, it wouldn't matter if she had a paper bag over her head, because it wasn't about whether there was a beautiful woman or whether he was enjoying sex or whether it was just, here's my addiction and those are the people that help me fulfill that hit that I need at that moment.
And that's, it's important too to say that this isn't something that Bob got out to Hollywood and became famous. And
yeah, he wasn't
crazy.
Hollywood turned him into a bad boy.
This was something that was going on back in Connecticut, back in the 50s, that went with him to Hollywood, that went with him. And he tried to not be, not have that lifestyle or do those things. He tried very hard. But when you're an addict, and you have to remember too, the era today, if somebody says, I'm an addict and I'm going to go check myself in for counseling and I'm going to go and I'm going to do this, people will rally around those people, whether they're famous or not famous. You rally around somebody who is trying to get their life straightened out. You just do. It's kind of like, okay, great, we're all rooting for you. In 1978, it was a very much different mindset, and you didn't talk about it. So when people
certainly not sex addiction. Certainly never sex. I mean, it's bad enough.
That's
bad
right.
enough to discuss any of the other addictions.
Absolutely
but
right.
Sex addiction, people still laugh about it.
That's
it's not
correct.
funny.
That's
People
correct.
say, Tiger Woods was a sex addict. No, he wasn't. He was just a guy with a big libido and a big ego. And David Duchovny, I think it once said he was a sex addict, checked himself in somewhere for a week and came out and he was done. I'm like, that's not addiction. That's just an I need a break. So people laugh and go, I wish I had that kind of addiction. Ha ha ha. I wish my wife had that kind of addiction. Ha ha ha. It's like that's not what a sex addiction is. And that misunderstanding that just because it's sex doesn't mean that you're having a good time. And is one of those societal things, isn't it?
And Bob, anybody at that point, if you're coming to the realization, regardless of when it is or who it is, you're coming to that realization that I am an addict, I need help, I need professional help, I need to get my life back in order because my family's falling apart, my career is falling apart, and I need to fix things, that's not something you brag about. And so people didn't know that he had these conversations. Now, people, what did he do with all the naughty tapes and everything? And his intent, allegedly, was to go back to LA after Beginner's Luck closed in Scottsdale at the end of June, early July, and start destroying those tapes and start doing what Reverend Beck called surgery. You've got to cut out the things in your life that are the enablers, the tapes, the hangers on, AKA John Carpenter, those types of things and people. And so what he allegedly was going to do was to go back home, take care of that business. And then Reverend Beck was getting him set up with a very well-renowned psychologist who specialized in sexual addiction in Los Angeles that Bob was going to then see, when he got back home. And of course, none of that happened because he never got back home. And so you have this whole piece of what could have happened if Bob had made it home and had been able to go. Would he have tripped and fallen along the way? Probably. This is a very messy type of addiction in that all addictions are messy, but this one in particular, because if you're an alcoholic, if you're a drug addict, not that they are easier, but you don't have to have those types of things around you. You take a step outside your front door and there are women everywhere. And so to try and beat this type of an addiction is something that is very, very difficult. Reverend Beck, we asked him, do you think he would have succeeded? And of course you don't know, you can't know. And you don't get to, pretend that we would know. But he said it would have been very hard. It would have been a struggle. And he would have tried very hard, but there's no telling in whether or not he would have been able to succeed.
The thing it did say though was that he had the mindset.
Yes, and I was just
He Yeah, sorry. He,
No,
he
no,
had
that's
the mindset. He wanted to.
Yes.
It wasn't, he
Mhm.
was very clear
Yes,
about wanting to finally
yes.
do it, because he had said to Ed Beck, as you said, you went to a town and you said, I'm not going to do that.
And that shook him.
I
It
know this
shook
is a
him.
problem. He knew that his marriages had suffered or failed because of it.
Mhm.
He knew that it was hurting his children, and he didn't want that to be his legacy.
Yes.
And so he knew the importance of it. He knew that it would save his life, so to speak,
Mhm.
and his family and his career, if he could just get this
Yes.
under control, if he couldn't beat it completely, that he
Mhm.
had that right mindset of saying,
Yes.
I must stop this, and I
Yes.
am ready to.
Yes.
And he had
But-
never actually gotten to that point
Never-
before,
yes,
of
that's
going to
right.
somebody and saying, I need to stop this, because I think he had said to others, well, I like sex. It's like,
Right,
well, duh.
right.
Most guys like sex. I mean, most people like sex. So duh, you like sex. He said, but you're not having, the Reverend said to him, you're not having a relationship. You're not having sex. You're having addiction.
Mhm.
Well, I can say from reading your book and knowing with his mindset, I want to play drums. He's a great drummer. I want to be a radio personality. He's a great personality. I think he would have beaten it. Knowing how disciplined he is, and how when he wants something, he goes after it. I think he would have done it if he was given enough time.
Well, we can only hope. And
Mhm.
the Reverend did say that in terms of addictions, like Carol said, it's all addictions are different, but he did compare it to the harder drugs.
Yes.
They are it is one of the harder addictions. Because let's face it, it takes his whole body,
Mhm.
and there's always that temptation there, and there's always that, and it's the emotional need that goes with that, because addictions feed a need, whether it's a physical need because of it's alcohol or drugs that your body starts to crave. With sex addiction, our understanding is that it's obviously at some point there has been a physical need, or a physical craving, so to speak, from the addiction. But it also stems from an emotional need, because you don't start out by saying, I'll just have sex today, but I won't have it tomorrow, and I won't become addicted. People have sex lives and they don't become addicted. They get married, or they have partners or whatever, and they don't become addicted. And the more sex that you have, the harder your body has to work to get that same reaction, which is the same for any of the harder drugs.
Mm-hmm.
And your body can only do so much. So you have to start doing other things. And it became, the Reverend did say, and it's unfortunate, but this is part of his addiction. It's like, he was into some weird stuff. Or he got, because his body was not doing, reacting
also,
the way it would have when he first started having sex.
And also too, the type of people that he then would hang around were the types of people were, not the top members of society. They were people that, would do more of those types of, things. And that's, where towards the end in the, throughout the 70s, of course, this is where, at post Hogan's Heroes, but the Bob Crane show on NBC is a failure. He's on the road a lot because he has to pay bills and he has to make money. And so that's perfect, place to just carouse, and so he's finding himself, in groups of people who are, we'll just say that they're creeps. They're the creeps of society, and they are not people that you would consider trustworthy. And yet Bob found it hard to not put walls up, around people, because he
had no filters.
He had no,
and
well,
I think
Scotty
said that best. I think he had no filters where it came to people.
Yeah.
The other thing too, I think, is that he wanted to be liked by everyone too. So he would be so worried that somebody's gonna be mad at him. So he would do, I think if maybe he was trying to stay away from somebody, then he'd be worried that they they thought that he was mad at them. He wouldn't want that to happen. So I couldn't imagine the things that would be going through his head trying to get over that addiction. So
very, very hard thing. And Reverend Beck did said he spoke to a friend of his who was also in counseling in, I believe, Kentucky. And he was going to get Bob some names of people that he could deal with in Los Angeles, because Bob was heading home, and said, these are the people and they deal with this kind of addiction. And again, in those days, there weren't a lot of them, because, and if there were, they were very quiet about it, because it was not an addiction that was considered an addiction. It was, you're having sex, so what? And again, the way people treated it then, even now, people still laugh at it. Oh, it's sex, haha. It's like, sex can be an addiction, and it doesn't mean that it's any more fun because you're using your entire body with this addiction. You're not just saying, I'm going to work and then I'm going to go, and have a hit or whatever. It's all around you all day, all the time. It was probably good for Bob that for the most part he was working on a set with men, not because he was going to do anything on set, because 99 out of 100 people have said to us that his behavior on set was fine, perfectly acceptable. The women that we spoke to said he never created any issues for anyone that he worked with, but it also meant that he didn't have to try and block that addiction out of his mind, because he was working with Larry Hovis and Robert Clary and Ivan Dixon and Richard Dawson and Werner Klemper and John Banner, as opposed to constantly working with Arlene Martell or Cindy Lynn or any of those other or female guests. Or, it was easier for him to control his addiction in a setting where it wasn't bombarding him all the time. It would be like, even for the CBC, for the folks from Celebrity Chefs, said that they had people that they said when they came into the set, they said, make sure there's no alcohol anywhere near here. Great, you can just pull that temptation away immediately. How do you remove all the women in the world?
Exactly. No.
But Bob really wanted to do that, and part of that was, as Ed Beck said, as Carol said, you have to now perform surgery, cut those people out, cut those meetings, get rid of those tapes, concentrate on these other things. He was losing everything, and he got to that rock bottom where he realized that he was losing work and his family, and it was time to turn around. And he stepped up, and it's a very brave step to take when you know that everything hinges on it, and that you could lose even more if that's possible. The public see you one way, and he could lose that. And so he still took that step and said, I still need to do something about it. And then he lost the chance to actually follow through.
Yeah.
He was very prophetic, because 2 days before he was murdered, on June 27th, he had his last media interview, and he is quoted as saying, if I were ever to write my own autobiography, I would title it Laughing All the Way to the Grave.
Yeah.
Yes. And, and what that shows is they try to paint him out. People try to paint him out as the movie that shall not be named tries to paint him out as being depressed, washed up. Thank you, John Carpenter, if you're the one who murdered me, because my life was over anyway, and I forgive you. That they, and Bob had so much life left to live. Was he sad?
No, it's all right.
The dog's mad about this.
Worried now.
I've got a cat. Can you hear my cat crying on the inside?
All the animals are upset over this.
She got worried now. She's like, what's the matter, Mom? What's the matter?
I promised the two of you, I have two more questions to go. I'm having a great time interviewing both of you.
We couldn't
I'm
tell.
getting hungry. It's lunchtime now. I'm going to take the dog. Hello, Charlie.
She's on the other side of the door like, Mommy, you never close this door.
Well,
Okay.
like as I was telling Linda, I said I only have 2 more questions to go. I really appreciate this. I'm having such a great time interviewing the both of you. It's such a fascinating subject, and you two did a great job.
We're just weird.
Yeah. What was that? Oh, you just...
Usually people have us come back 2-3 times.
I know. Well, I figured it's like, well, I have you here now. And I know since you're in Australia, you're in New Jersey, might as well just do it now. And it worked out well. So we're down to the final act. Let's set the record straight. I know there's a lot to go over, so we can do the Reader's Digest condensed version. What is fact versus fiction regarding June 29th, 1978? So
Fact versus fiction.
Well,
we already know the movie that should not be named. It's all
yeah,
fiction. We're not
just
even
ignore
going there.
that. Mind you, having said that, the one thing that I will give the film is that it was, ignore all the rest of it. Yes, you too. It's based on Robert Graysmith's book, which was intended to be about the murder, not about everything before it. So Robert Graysmith himself actually said to us that the world needed a proper in-depth biography of Bob Crane, because he never intended to do that.
Well,
His intention was to understand the murder.
Yes.
And so he did a lot of research on the things around the murder. Unfortunately, by doing that, he got a lot of other things wrong and took a lot of things at face value that he shouldn't have. But we'll go into his journalistic credentials another time. But in terms of the film, what he was looking for was, tell me about the murder. There's a fly in here and my dog thinks of them as sky raisins, so I apologize for the noise in advance. So what we know is that Bob was uncomfortable being in Scottsdale.
Yes.
He asked the Thompsons, to Johnny and Pam, who had worked with him many times, to come out to Scottsdale, and he would pay for them whatever they were in Vegas at the time doing Johnny's Magic Show. Mm-hmm. And whatever they were paying, he would match, double, whatever. He wanted them out there. They could not get out of their Vegas contract, so they did not go. We know that he vaguely mentioned, or in passing mentioned to Victoria Barry Wells, that Scottsdale was, for all I know still is, you watch Mob Wives, is a mob town. And it was a statement made in passing, but seemed to concern him because he mentioned it more than once. We know that he went to the Windmill Dinner Theater, performed the show as he normally would have performed the show, hung around for a while with fans as he normally did, and left. We know that he was seen, I believe there was an issue with a tire. Yes, on his car. Mm-hmm. People can read whatever they want into that as to whether it was supposed to set up him for murder or whatever. Nobody will ever know that. It was a problem with the car tire. It got sorted out. He was seen at a diner late in the evening, very late in the evening, because the shows ended late anyway, so it would have been probably 1 o'clock in the morning. With John Carpenter. One person says that there were some raised voices. We don't know what they were talking about. We don't know if there was an argument. We just know that they were speaking loudly, according to this one person, who, if they're speaking that loudly, you figured you'd pick up a few words, but they didn't. So again, it's all about what somebody says and whether they are looking for fame or whether they really know something. We know that Bob went home to the condo, that John Carpenter was there for a while, and that he left. And we know that Bob went to sleep. And then we know he didn't wake up. There was no sign of break-in. The apartment was, the condo was unlocked. And there was an open bottle of alcohol on one of the counters, vodka, I believe. Now, stop it. Bob didn't drink it all, but that doesn't mean that he didn't let other people around him drink, you know, so we don't know who had that. And we know that he was a very, very light sleeper, and yet he was killed in his sleep. So the conclusion that they draw from that is that the person was either with him when he went to sleep, or he was comfortable enough with whoever it was that he didn't really stir when they came in. That's all we actually know. There is that is fact as we have been given it, as in even the people who say, oh, they were arguing, or we don't know if they were arguing. All we know is they were there, because nobody knows what they said. But that is all we know as fact. He was bludgeoned to death. They never found the weapon. They believe that it was a camera tripod, because they found wipe marks on the blanket, the sheets.
And it also was when they lined up a tripod, a similar tripod,
yeah,
to those blood sheets, it matched the tripod. Because
there was camera equipment all over the place, all over there were some photos. There was a photo album missing that would have had photos of naked women, or women just dressed or undressed. There was a photo album missing. There was blood on a window frame, a little bit of blood on a window frame.
And
there was a lot of blood splattered around the room, but that would be from the actual killing. And the Reverend Beck said that there was something written, but we never found out anything about that.
And very disturbing.
Yeah, and there was, after he died, and the autopsy determined it was done after he died, someone tied a VCR cord around his neck in a bow, but that was after he had died.
You have to remind people it was 1978 and there was no DNA evidence back then. So that's why John Carpenter, not the director, another guy, was tried and he was acquitted.
Well, they lost the evidence at that stage, because he didn't go on trial for 16 years, and they had mishandled that crime scene so badly.
Yes.
So badly.
I mean, they were carrying boxes out, within hours of
smoking and handling everything, so they couldn't do fingerprinting, and it was awful, awful. And I won't even explain to you because it's not worthy of repeating. No. What Ed Beck said about how they used him to identify Bob. No. That's just horrendous. And again, that's all mishandling and just awful, awful stuff. And so they just focused in on John Carpenter. Now, what they do know is that John Carpenter called twice while they were there, while the police were there. And the police answered the phone and he said, can I talk to Bob? And they said no. And he never asked why not, where he was, why the police were there. And is that odd? Sure. Do people
set up
do
an alibi? It sounds like. I was going to say, it sounds like he's trying to set up an alibi. No, I called. I didn't realize he was gone. So, I mean,
but he called twice and the police answered the phone. But, there are, I think I've said to Carol, we sat down one day and just there are 5 active theories of who killed Bob in terms of for what reason or what kinds of people. I have my own theory. The police believe they had the right man. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I don't necessarily disagree. When we don't discuss our own thoughts other than to give the facts as they are presented, or the witness things, the witness statements as they are presented, because we're never going to know.
Yeah.
There's only one other theory I heard, and that was from Bob Crane's son in an interview. He thinks maybe you know where I'm going with this, Hilda, who she played Hilda on Hogan's Heroes, second wife. That's all.
The police said, the police said, and I believe, or probably came from the coroner, not even physically possible.
Okay. Yeah.
Not because she was in another state, but could not have been a woman, because the force that was used would not have, and they would have, forensically worked out, the arc of what they would have had to have done to hold, hold the thing, and how they not even physically possible. But does he have it? Is he entitled to his opinion? Sure he is. But I don't subscribe to it. I think he knows that we don't subscribe to it.
Yes.
But he's entitled to his own opinion. He's entitled
to his theories. Yep, he is.
Yeah, that's his son, so he's entitled to his own opinion.
And
but the police have said no way.
Yeah. When you have an unsolved case like this, you're going to have theories. They're just going to happen. People are going to play armchair detective. We do it all the time when we're watching the TV shows. And, I mentioned earlier, Homicide Hunter. And, we're all, how many true crime podcasts are out there that talk about, Bob included. I don't listen to them because it's the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. And it's not what I'm interested in when it comes to Bob. I'm interested in his life. And then they, of course, usually go down the road of, celebrity cooks and all those things, which, only gets my blood pressure up. But
if they would only read,
but, we're all, I think it's part of our human nature to try and solve a mystery. And that's why we like mysteries so much. We love our Agatha Christie and we love our Sherlock Holmes and we love all of these things. And this is an active, unsolved, high profile mystery. And so everybody has an opinion. When I go and when I go and do talks and go to Mid-Atlantic Nostalgia, and I go to Liberty Aviation Museum, which has all of the Hogan's Heroes, uniforms and costumes and stuff, people come up to me, they're like, oh yeah, Bob Crane, I know all about him. Who do you think did it? And it's like
all the messages we get on the Facebook page, all the messages we get on the Facebook page from random people. You just see every few months, you get one little ping on your messenger, and it just says, "Who do you think killed Bob Crane?" I'm like,
and it's so and people are very mostly they're very innocent when they do it, because it's like
they're curious.
They're curious, and they'll say, "Oh yeah, Hogan's Heroes, love that show. Oh yeah, oh look at the uniforms. Oh that's great. Oh yeah, this is a big book. Who do you think killed him?" And they like.
Well, and let's face it, these people know that we've spoken with more people than anyone ever bothered to, or ever has, who knew Bob directly through any phase of his life. No one else has done this, so they figure if anybody's going to know or have a clue, it's going to be us.
I will back that up.
And we just don't, of course we have our own theories, because we have our own theories, but are we going to explain any of them? Nope.
Well, I did enough research before, this interview to know that you don't answer that question. That's why I didn't even bother with that. I went right to what I heard and let you speak about the facts. And
I want to say, though, too, that Linda and Dee and I, it started out, it always will be a labor of love for all three of us. We believe very wholeheartedly in our subject. We protect him fiercely in the fact that he's been so badly, represented in many ways since his death. But we also are fiercely protective of his family. We're fiercely protective of his friends and his colleagues who we got to know. And it became personal to us. Like some people, and it's perfectly fine for people to have a whole stream of biographies that they've written. I know authors who have written more than one biography, and I'm amazed by it, because it's like, wow, how many biographies can you have in you? Because that's really amazing. Because
when we finished this one, what was the first question? Who's next? We're like,
who's next?
Nobody. Nobody's next. Nobody's next. I don't want to do anybody else. This one started out as if you read the section that I wrote in there, I started because I said, that's not fair.
Yeah,
that was the whole premise of the beginning for me, was that's not fair. That's it. I haven't said that about any other person that I've seen. This is the only one. There's no, there's no more. There's no more.
What impressed me about you, Carol, before you get into what you want to say, was how old were you when your interest in Bob Crane of saying, I got to write this biography on him? How old were you when this began?
It's funny because I never thought about writing a book. I was very little. I was 14, 15 years old, and I just fell in love with the show. And I remember when I first started watching the show, I didn't know Bob was dead. I just thought these were like really neat characters, and I wanted to learn more about the actors who played them. And I was very little, not very little. I was in my I was a tween. I
You
was
were never
14,
little.
15. I went to You're the bush, I'm the tree. Was that Jim? Jim said that, I think. So we went, so I went to the movies this one night with my friends, and before we went over to the theater, we were all going over to the B. Dalton bookstore in the mall. And this was like summer of '85, and I was really interested in finding a book about Hogan's Heroes. And so, now it's like everything's at your fingertips. In the 1980s, there was nothing. I didn't know there were trading cards or a lunchbox, or I knew that there was somewhere an album because I had found this one album of all the different theme songs, and Bob's version of the one that's on the drums and orchestra one is on that. But like there was nothing, and so I went into the bookstore, and I go back to the TV category section, and I'm going through, and I found this really big green book, and it was called The Great TV Sitcom Book. And I'm like, wow, this is great. And so it's like this thick, and so I'm going through, flipping through, and there's Hogan's Heroes. I'm like, yes, there's a little picture, because there weren't pictures back then, it was nothing. And I read it, and I remember standing in the middle of B. Dalton's bookseller, and I'm reading this thing, and it was, just one column. And at the very end, it said Bob Crane was bludgeoned to death in June 1978 in Scottsdale, Arizona. And my world just kind of went, what? And I remember going to the movies and sitting there I bought the book, sitting there with the book under the seat in the theater with my friends. And we were watching Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. And I'm sitting there crying because I had just found out that this actor who I really had taken an interest in, and my friends were into rock and going to concerts and Bruce Springsteen and that, and I'm watching Hogan's Heroes, and I just really felt sad. I felt really sad, and so I started going to one of the local libraries, which was rather large for a county library, and they had all the microfilms and microfiches in this library, and I would go and I would start researching, and my mom and dad would go to the mall, which was across the street from this library, and I would sit there for 2 hours in the microfilm room, and I would just start looking for newspapers, and so I found Bob's obituary from the New York Times and from the Philadelphia Inquirer and the Courier Post. I found John Banner's obituary. I just started finding things, and I put the quarter in and print them out. And, that was where I really started to think, this is wrong. This man's been murdered and it's unsolved, and this isn't right. And so that kind of stayed with me to some degree. I always loved Hogan's Heroes. I wrote fan fiction. I did all of those things that, you do. And then Linda and I met on Yahoo group. And I remember she had written to the group. This was in about 2003. And she had written to the group looking to see if anybody, just had any, idea where people were, if anybody was a part of the listserv, because this is before Facebook, before all of that. And I remember getting the email as part of my listserv and going, wow, that's pretty amazing, and good luck with that, because that is a massive undertaking to try and write about Bob Crane, because I had already known at that point that there were so many layers, even in my preliminary, very young and amateurish research. And I remember Linda and I just started talking. And, we just kind of, one thing led to another. She had at that point also reached out to Dee, like a year and a half later. And we just, it kind of became a mission. And, the rest was history. Like I said before, this book could not have been done by one person. We all brought strengths to this. We brought research, we brought journalism, we brought writing, we brought publishing, we brought radio, we brought passion. Each of us is passionate and cares so much about Bob, but also about his family, about his friends, and about those, the people he worked with and the people that we became friends with as a result, and brought in like family. The book is dedicated to Charlie Zito, who was Bob's best friend from school. And I knew Charlie very well. And, these people are real people with real lives. And they've been harassed by the media. They've been harassed. They would have loved to have talked to people about Bob, but all anybody ever wanted to know before us was, what was he like in bed, and that kind of thing. And it was something that, even to this day, they still get that. They still get those pokes and prods about, what was he like in that regard. And we protect. We don't want them to, we kind of are now their shield. We'll answer those questions for them. They can certainly answer them if they would like, but we have the full knowledge of a complete study of a person. Now, do we know what he was like on Christmas morning? No, we're not his kids. We're not his intimate family. And they bring that piece of it to the public eye when they want to and when they feel that they can. But as far as understanding Bob as a human being, we do that. And we do that for Bob, but we do it for all of them too.
Very good. Well, it was so great having the two of you on the show. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
And I'm sure your cat and your dog are going to be very, very happy we're done.
They left me now. I think they were like, they just wanted to play.
But before we leave, I have one final question, and I'm hoping that you two and Dee are going to change this. What do you think will be Bob Crane's legacy?
What is it, or what it should be?
What do you think? I mean, what is it? And I'm hoping that with your book, it's going to change what some people might think his legacy was. I'm hoping now they have a new meaning to what his life is and was. So
to be honest, I think until the book came out, his legacy was, he was a guy who was into sex and he was murdered, and he played Colonel Hogan.
Yep. And
that was it. And again, perpetuated by that piece of celluloid. But I think a little at a time now, thanks to all the wonderful people who trusted us, which for us, and we haven't really mentioned this, although I know it's in your heart as much as mine, that we feel so privileged that these people eventually, and some of these people, including like Robert Clary, it took 5 years to stop getting no's from Robert Clary. And I really wanted to talk to Robert Clary. And we are so privileged that these people trusted us enough to tell their story. And thanks to those people, Bob's legacy is changing. Like, we put it all together, but if they didn't come and tell us their stories, they've always wanted to tell their stories. But what we didn't realize what I certainly didn't realize when I first said, this isn't fair, I'm doing something else, was how badly that film burned people. Carrying back not just to that film, but as far back as when Bob passed away, when people said, we want to, yes, we'll come on your show, but we want to tell you about the Bob that we knew. And the show would say, no, so they didn't show up. So thanks to these 200 some odd people who had the courage and the trust to honor us with their stories and their memories and their history, I think Bob's legacy is becoming that here was a talented guy, a human being in the fullest sense of the word, with all his flaws and all his glory, who was kind, who was well-intended, and who just wanted to be happy and to make people happy. And he's left a joyful legacy. I can't remember which one of them said it, but one of the directors that we spoke to from Hogan's Heroes, I could say it was Jerry London, maybe. Or maybe it was Bob Sweeney. He wore a beard of joy.
Bruce Bilson.
The way it was
I
described.
think it was Bruce Bilson.
I think so.
I think it was Bruce Bilson.
And, or was it Jerry because he called him Skippy?
Bruce Bilson called him Skippy.
Yeah.
Bruce called him
And
Skippy.
he said that, you know, he was joyful, he was kind, he was open, he was always willing to learn. There are good lessons to learn in how he lived his life in good ways. And there are lessons of things, you know, cautionary tales as well. But his legacy is so much more now, I think, thanks to these people who've been, because we wouldn't speak to one person from school. We spoke to 40 people from school if we could. We didn't speak to one director from Hogan's Heroes. We got as many people as we could. If somebody said, I've got a story, we'd listen. And so thanks to that, we got such a full picture, or as full a picture as we could possibly get hold of. That thanks to those people, his legacy is so much more of a life lived as well as he could live it.
Yes.
Which is so much more evolutionary than what we had to start with. And I'm so proud of that for those people. And I think,
Yes, I am
Carol,
too.
you probably agree.
Absolutely. And to build on that, the honor that we feel in having these people trust us, as you were saying, you know, these people were hurting. I mean, I lost my dad 2 months ago to natural causes, but I hurt. And if somebody was going to say something bad about my dad, I don't know how his, you know, his daughter and his daughters and his sons, yeah, I don't know how they can, you know, continue to battle the negativity that comes at them day in and day out. The trust that we earned, and it was hard to earn it because these people were so protective of Bob and of themselves. And when I look back at all of that and how it all evolved into what it became and is still becoming, it is such an honor and a privilege, and it's humbling because we hold this man's life in our hands by what we've done, but we also are holding all of them as well. And that, to me, you know, that it just, it's such a part of my being that it can bring me to tears quite often. Bob's legacy, as you said, Linda, is, you know, it is evolving. And I think it's evolving because of the people that trusted us.
Yeah.
And we continue to, we didn't just write a book and put it on a bookshelf and walk away. We continue to tell his story every chance we get.
Glad the two of you had a chance to tell your story on my show. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for having all of us,
Thank you for
furry and
having
otherwise.
Well, that wraps up another episode of the Claw's Corner. I would like to thank my guests, Carol Ford and Linda Groundwater, for a fun and interesting interview to celebrate the life and legacy of Bob Crane. I would also like to thank you, the viewer, for tuning in. Enjoy your day, everyone.